Your bell work for today is to tell me what religions you can name or you can remember that we've talked about so far in this class. Ideally, you should be able to come up with at a minimum 2, but probably realistically 4 or 5. Today we're going to talk about reactions to the Vedic religion and Brahmanism. We are still in the South Asian states and Dharmic religions section. Our unit claim is, to what extent was the Gupta Empire a continuation of the Mauryan Empire? All right, so we begin with source 3. It is also in your worksheet if you want to follow along there. It is adapted from Johannes Bronkhorst, The Historiography of Brahmanism in History and Religion, Narrating a Religious Past, published in 2015. It says Vedic Brahmanism was a priestly religion, not unlike the priestly religions of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, which we've already talked about, right? As such, it was bound to one single culture, to one single society, and to one single language. It had a close association with the rulers of the society to which it belonged, for whom it provided ritual services. Vedic religion has no exclusive truth claims, and if you look at the video, I tell you, like, a truth claim is a hypothesis made but not proven to be true. So, for example, in Judaism, the truth claim is that there's only one God, right? So they're not saying they know, like, some big reveal truth that will save you or anything like that. And they say that, and they don't try to make converts. Beginning in the 4th century BCE, northern India became unified into an empire, or rather a sequence of 2 empires, the first one under the Nanda dynasty and the second under the Mauryans. We looked at this a little bit yesterday as a reminder, right? We had all those separate small undefined states, and then the second map we looked at had 2 larger dynasties, so leading up. The center of these 2 empires lay in the eastern part of the Ganges Plain, outside the realm of the traditional Vedic religion, which was centered in its western part. So east is where the center of the empire is, west is where the center of the Vedic religion is. Therefore, its rulers did not continue the Vedic traditional sacrificial cult. Remember, cult means ritual. So those traditional sacrificial rituals, the rulers of the Mauryan Empire were not really bringing those forward. The degree of centralization, especially of the Mauryan Empire, though weak by modern standards, was high enough to discontinue traditional rulership in the Vedic heartland, meaning these rulers, again, were not continuing to practice these traditional rituals. This meant that the end of the traditional support for the Vedic religion. Vedic religion, if it wanted to survive at all, had to reinvent itself. So these sources are a little difficult for 9th graders, so the questions I designed are helping you kind of break them down. So if you look at the first question on your worksheet, it says, how is Vedic Brahmanism described? So really specifically in the first paragraph of this source, see if you can find 2 to 3, I found at least 4 bullets on how to describe Brahmanism. So I'm a visual learner, so I like to be able to see what I'm learning about or talking about. So I pulled up these maps for you guys just to kind of explain what this is saying. So if you look on the left where it says late Vedic period, everything in the brown is showing you where they practice these traditional sacrificial cults, where they held these ritual services, right? On the right is the Maurya dynasty, and you can see it's most of India, or South Asia as we're calling it, right? And this is a little bit later than the Vedic period. What's important to know is that in the Maurya dynasty, if you look over here, their capital is very far east. If you look at the left, this Vedic practice is centered more in the west. So the capital is right around, let's see, in this area. If we're looking at the reverse, maybe in this area. Over here. So that's what it's saying, not in the realm of the Vedic practices, right? So according to Bronkhorst, how did political change in South Asia affect Vedic Brahmanism? So I've already explained the answer to you, but the question is what could trip you up. So how did political change, identify what the political change is, and then answer this question. All right, so when I was reading through source 3, and it talks about how the rulers did not continue the Vedic traditional sacrificial cult or rituals, right? I was like, okay, what are these sacrificial rituals? Are they sacrificing humans? What are they sacrificing? Why are these rulers not continuing them? So this is one of the biggest ones I could find. It's called Ashvamedha. Ashvamedha is a horse sacrifice ritual followed by the Vedic religion. It was used by ancient Indian kings to prove their imperial sovereignty, right? To prove that they're the righteous ruler. So a horse, accompanied by the king's warriors, would be released to wander for a period of 1 year. In the territory traversed by the horse, so like anywhere it went, any rival could dispute the king's authority by challenging the warriors that are accompanying it. After 1 year, if no enemy had managed to kill or capture the horse, the animal would be guided back to the king's capital. At that point, the horse would be sacrificed, but the king would be declared as an undisputed sovereign. So like we read in source 3, this religion or this belief has a close association with the rulers of the society, right? So this sacrificial ritual is about the ruler of the society. Take a moment, answer number 3. All right, source 4. And again, if you can't see it that well in the video, it is also on your worksheet. It is excerpted from Jacob Kinnard. It says, a new genre of religious discourse began to emerge out of the Vedic religious world sometime between the 7th and 5th centuries BCE, a body of doctrines known as the Upanishads. I want to stop right there. Source 3's last line said, source 3, the last one, Vedic religion, if it wanted to survive at all, had to reinvent itself. So let's reread the first line of source 4. A new genre of religious discourse began to emerge out of the Vedic religious world. Okay, so it is reinventing itself, right? All right, so we have this body of doctrines known as the Upanishads. Although they would eventually become part of Hinduism, these texts, orally transmitted, passed down by mouth, right, word of mouth, like the Vedas, questioned the efficacy of the formal sacrifice and introduced new essential religious ideas. Let's pause for a moment. The efficacy means like in this context, like the value of, the purpose of, the efficiency of these sacrifices, right? Like they're questioning them. And instead, they introduce these essential religious ideas, many of which would be eventually adopted by Buddha. So the cyclical rebirth, or the cyclical idea of rebirth, which is samsara. So when you die, you're born again. And based on what kind of life you lived, if you were a good person or a bad person or whatever, then you would be born into something based on your actions. So let's say you were really bad, you'd be born into like a roach or something. The ethical law of cause and effect, or karma, which most of us have heard of, right? When someone's like, oh, that's karma, like something bad happened to you because you did something bad. That's what that's talking about. And then the concept of liberation or moksha from the world of samsara through the path of asceticism. So to be liberated from that cyclical idea of rebirth, you reach nirvana, essentially, right? You're not going to continue to be reborn at that point. You have done enough good deeds. You've been liberated, right? So that's moksha. And that's a good thing. And then the importance of calming the mind through meditation or yoga. What is most important for the present context is to recognize that the Buddha and Buddhism arose out of this atmosphere of a great religious flux. Think like fluctuation, right? Change. A sustained period of questioning the old religious and ritual values and practices. The Buddha certainly adopted basic Indian religious vocabulary of his day, but he also crafted it into his own particular message, changing some basic ideas and rejecting others. So if we look at number 2 on our worksheet, it says, what are the new, let me go forward to the next slide. Oh, there we go. What are the new essential religious ideas that were introduced to the Upanishad? So look at source 4 again and tell me, what are these ideas? For number 5, it said, how did the growing popularity of these new religious practices, the ones you just listed in number 4, so hopefully you got samsara, karma, moksha, yoga, right? How did the growing popularity of these new religious practices likely impact the frequency of sacrificial rituals, so the old religious practices, and the importance of the priests who were required to perform those older practices? So I'm going to kind of do this one with you because my students in class struggled a bit. But if you have all these new practices like yoga, like karma, like the idea of a cyclical rebirth, and that's what you're focused on, you're less likely to focus on the older ideas, right? You've kind of moved forward. So these sacrificial rituals like Ashvamedha, or there's plenty of other ones, may not be as frequent, right? They may not be as common. So then you tell me, how important are the priests who are performing them? All right, number 6, and I know, by the way, I didn't say this, but I know that the numbering on your worksheet is wrong unless I fixed it by now, but I don't think I have. I'm sorry about that, but you can deal. All right, the text of the Upanishads was mostly attributed to a group of anonymous authors, right? So these texts that were handed down by word of mouth were not written by any one person, but it was specifically by a group of anonymous authors, so they don't even know exactly who. How might that affect the development of Hinduism and Buddhism? It also asks a central theme in the Upanishads was to question authority, to question what you're being told, especially about religion. How might that have affected the development of Hinduism and Buddhism? Take a moment and see if you can answer those questions. All right, hopefully you paused, did that, and you're back. So I just do want to go over this part a little bit. What we're getting at, and there could have been so many different answers. That's okay. There's not really like one right answer. But ideally, what I want you to understand is that that's part of why Hinduism and Buddhism developed out of the same text, right? They both kind of come from Upanishads, but they're different beliefs. And that's because when you're questioning the authority, right? You're questioning this anonymous group of authors. You have to interpret these things on your own. And like Buddha did, like where it says in source 4, he adopted some of it, but then changed basic ideas and rejected it. They're going to interpret it differently. So the development of Hinduism and the development of Buddhism are going to look very different. That's why they are different beliefs, right? Lastly, I want you to look at this little flow chart. It explains that Brahmanism or Vedic tradition, those religious sacrificial cults and that, ancient belief did eventually develop into both Buddhism and Upanishad Hinduism. Or I love letting you guys hear that little reminder of what school's like. I don't even say they necessarily developed into it, but that these developed out of it, which is just semantics, just wording. But you do see Buddhism and Hinduism come because of the things that developed out of Brahmanism. So use this frame to write a sentence that compares the two religions. Well, in Vedic Brahmanism, does the word Vedic there look like it's a smaller font? That's weird. Focuses on blank. So tell me what you've learned that Vedic Brahmanism focuses on. The Upanishads focused on what? So can you tell me the difference between the two? Because today, ideally, we're looking at the reactions to Vedic Brahmanism, right? And then like what they transitioned into. So the reaction would be like the action that follows, like their thoughts on it, which I'm just making it harder. So that's it for today. Make sure you upload this into Canvas and have a good one. Oh, just kidding. If you're still here, I just wanted to remind you that your unit claim is to what extent was the Gupta Empire a continuation of the Mauryan Empire? And when I first read this, right, because this claim's kind of given to me from College Board, I choose to use it, but when I first read this, I'm like, ooh, I don't know if these sources are really that closely related to what this claim is saying, but you have to really dive into it, right? So the Gupta Empire is a continuation of the Mauryan Empire, right? That's what it's asking you to explain. How much is it really a continuation of the Mauryan Empire? So we know that the Gupta comes after the Mauryan, right? So we can only assume that the Mauryan Empire was where we talk about like the Vedic Brahmanism, right? We know that it was in the Mauryan Empire that they moved to the east while the Vedic stayed kind of in the west, right? So if the Gupta comes next, do you think that it is the same as the Mauryan Empire? Is it a complete continuation? Do you think that it's going to be a little bit like the Mauryan Empire, but there are some shifts and changes? So a little bit of a continuation? Or do you think that the Gupta Empire will be an entirely new empire with different beliefs that's going to look totally different and be a complete, like no continuation of the Mauryan Empire? So using the sources we've talked about so far, see if you can find some evidence to make you lean a certain way. Okay, now that's it. Bye. Have a great day.